Hey there, Matt Hamilton, author of Through Travel and Error, Confessions of an Asylum-Seeking Canadian. Welcome back to my online readings. Today's chapter, B to C, is it's quite hectic. So much so that I've decided to split it into two separate readings. It deals with my adventure going from Nakate Bay, Malawi, all the way back to South Africa, once again using rough third world African transportation. I wanted to time my arrival in South Africa so that I could hit the club scene in Durban and specifically go out to a spot called 330s. Anyways, I hope you enjoy this adventure. It's called B to C. The Malawians were as friendly a people as I'd come across anywhere on my travels. With the exception of a few thugs in Lilongwe and Senga Bay, my perception of the people was that they were calm, peaceful, hospitable, and patient. These passive Malawians were the exact same type of people who were waiting with me for the bus to arrive. Everybody was sitting quietly and in an orderly line at the side of the road. Some were talking, some were singing, others were eating their picnic lunches. Everyone was dressed in their best clothing and waiting to begin their own journeys. It was a beautiful, tranquil scene. However, once the bus pulled up to the stop, everything tranquil and peaceful about the setting evaporated into a cloud of hectic energy. The passive, orderly queue transformed into a mass frenzy of commuters pushing and shoving to the entrance of the bus and slowly funneling through the cramped door. It was every man, woman, and child for himself. To make the effort more of a challenge, I was hauling two heavy and bulky Malawian chairs on top of my loaded pack. This made my ability to work my way to the front next to impossible. With the number of people pushing ahead of me, I didn't think there would be any way to get on the bus. I almost conceded that I would be stuck in Mzuzu for the night. Then a second bus arrived. Being at the back of the original mass, I thought I could make a quick jump over to the other vehicle before anybody else. I was wrong. Just as I got close to an open door, a wave of human flesh once again descended upon the one tiny entrance. A woman who must have been 80 elbowed me in the ribs in an attempt to gain better position. The blow worked. The strength of the mob and my limited desire to shove and box out senior citizens forced me away from the second bus and back towards the first. I felt like a rubber duck being tossed and turned at the leisure of the ocean's currents. How I managed to work my way to the front and onto the first bus is still a mystery. One moment I was nowhere near the door. The next, a hand grabbed my shoulder and pulled me on board. I awkwardly stepped over the obstacles in the aisle and crammed my gear and myself into an extremely uncomfortable seat. Now the bus took off, and again I had traveled enough that I knew that blocking things out mentally was mandatory. I was about to escape to my happy place when I made the rookie mistake of looking at the front of the bus. Not surprisingly, I saw my life flash before my eyes. In reality, it wasn't my life that flashed before my eyes, but an oncoming truck that was trying to cut a blind corner. This was the same truck that we proceeded to slam into with a deafening bang. The sound of crunching metal is always a terrible sound, but it is that much more terrifying when the metal you hear crushing is that of the vehicle you're in. I had been told that when a person was involved in an accident, time had a tendency of moving extremely slowly, as if each second was a minute. This testimony was disturbingly accurate. From the moment I saw that we were going to make impact, each second thereafter passed as though it were a slow-moving slideshow, allowing each horrifying detail to be etched onto my brain. The bus rocked, rattled, and came to a screeching stop. For a moment, there was deathly silence. Everybody was frozen in place. All of the passengers had been holding their breath, not knowing if it would be their last. Time regained its normal pace. The little boy next to me began to cry, breaking the shocked silence. The yelling began, and everybody let loose on this driver. He had nothing to do with it. He was screaming back at them. Everybody got off the bus because luggage is on the roof of the buses, and it all got launched over the highway. Now I'm kind of sitting there coming out of shock. I've got my backpack on my lap, but I decide to, go see the other guy that we hit, because I knew we hit a truck. So as I walked down the road, I come to this vehicle that's overturned and the driver is lying dead on the highway. I mean, he was clearly dead. And as I'm soaking that in, I hear cries and moans, and I walk over to the side of the road and I look down the embankment, and there's another bus, and I'm assuming it's the second bus traveling behind us that had, I'm guessing, swerved out of the way and went tumbling down this embankment, leaving carnage. As I was contemplating the magnitude of the accident and what needed to be done, I heard a terrifying, unmistakable sound which to this day remains scarred on my brain. It was the noise of a motor starting, revving and shifting into first gear. I turned in the direction of the reverberation, and to my complete horror, I realized that it was my bus that had been making the racket. My bus was beginning to drive into the night. That same bus was carrying everything I owned, including my backpack, money, credit cards, passport, chairs, and clothes. It was carrying everything I owned in my traveling world, except the most important item of all, me. I began to run. I didn't have time to think about why my bus might be abandoning me. I didn't have a chance to wonder why the hell these people were leaving the scene of an accident. The only thought that was going through my head was, run. I have never run faster in my life. However, despite my Olympic speed and desperate will, my legs weren't fast enough to make up the distance. The gap between the bus and me was growing. I continued to run with all my heart, but my legs began to give out and my lungs felt as though they were about to explode. I stumbled to a clumsy halt. I was still in disbelief that this was happening. However, the bus's red taillights disappeared over a hill and left me in complete darkness. It was another moment forever etched in my nightmares, and the brutal reality of my predicament slapped me hard in the face. My bus had deserted me in the middle of the night, in the middle of the highway, somewhere in the middle of Malawi, with absolutely nothing to my name. I had no money, no passport, and no clothing. I had absolutely zilch. I did what any sane person would have done in this circumstance. I completely and totally lost the plot. I cried, I screamed, I cursed God, I kicked at nothing, I punched the air, I punched the ground. I was probably in this state of lunacy for a few minutes before I stopped howling. My throat was raw from screaming, my knuckles were bleeding from punching the highway. I wiped the snot from my face, took a deep breath, and attempted to get a grip on the grim situation. I then had an extremely clear, lucid, and incredibly irrelevant thought. It was a thought induced, no doubt, by the madness of the moment. I looked down at my shoes, pants, and shirt. Despite being the very last thing that should have concerned me, I deliberated whether or not my clothes were styling clubbing gear. I realize that thought seems callous, but in actuality, it was my positive thinking working overtime. Subconsciously, my brain knew it would survive. It wasn't going to let my stranded ass die on the side of a highway. My brain knew that it was going to get back to Durban somehow. My brain knew that my friends in Durban wouldn't be able to float me the money for a new wardrobe, but they would certainly pay for my cover at the door and a few drinks in the club. What my brain didn't know was whether my clothes were a proper clubbing caliber. As it happened, I was wearing styling clubbing clothing. Alright, maybe the thought wasn't lucid, but it was definitely positive. And maybe it wasn't the most appropriate, but it was the best and only one that could lift me from my predicament. The thought was positive enough to force me to deal with the problem at hand. The first was helping the injured. I took another deep breath, turned around, and started to walk back to the carnage. And we'll leave you hanging on that. Hopefully you'll come back next week for part 2 of chapter B to C, which, actually gets a little bit more exciting and a little bit more interesting as well. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to find out more about myself and or the book, Through Travel and Error, Confessions of an Asylum-Seeking Canadian, please visit my website, madmaddiesworld.com. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.